In court, prosecutors say former mob boss Luigi Baby Shacks Minacchio forced the owners of the Cadillac Lounge to hire Cardillo, who then assisted in getting protection payments to the mob boss.
Boss is now being housed at a prison in Pennsylvania to serve out his sentence for racketeering conspiracy.
Government says you want Bobby DeLuca dead. Do they have that right? Right. That's all.
St. Laurent's most recent prison stint was a 7-year sentence for twice attempting to hire hitmen to kill rival mobster Robert Bobby DeLuca. The
victim there, identified now as 37-year-old Napoleon Andrade, was found dead Sunday on Slater Street. He was serving time in connection to a home invasion from 2010. The house he broke into at the time belonged to an associate of the Gambino crime family in New York.
It's the morning of March 10, 2019 in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. A former bouncer with a lengthy criminal rap sheet is leaving a halfway home he'd been staying at for the last few months, but it would be the last time he'd ever leave the building. A group in a Honda Accord had been stalking him that morning, while the cameras on the outside of the building were turned off. The Accord then pulled up by the home, and someone inside shot the bouncer dead at 9:30 a.m. Police come to learn within the day that their victim is 37-year-old Napoleon Andrade, a former bouncer at a Mafia-operated strip club. They'd also soon come to learn that Andrade had gotten himself tangled up in a web of underworld conspiracies that stretched far beyond Pawtucket and into Providence, Boston, and the small towns between them that make up a major portion of New England. Andrade was a close associate of a 100-year-old criminal organization in New England named the Patriarca Mafia family, specifically an employee of the family's boss, Luigi Minacchio. Andrade wasn't just any bouncer. He was a drug trafficker who'd gotten close to Minacchio over the years and got himself mixed up in a big mess with a Connecticut Mafia killer named Nicola Melia. But Melia would get his revenge almost a decade later. What started as an argument between two gangsters would lead to a violent holdup, expose traitors within Andrade's circle, and more importantly, bring the secretive, forgotten Rhode Island underworld to light. A criminal landscape made up of violent drug dealers, killers, and businessmen, all answering to a century-old hierarchy of senior citizens.
Everything is fine. I just can't walk there. If I could be walking, I wouldn't be talking about it.
80-year-old men who looked old and frail on the outside, but had histories of theft, violence, and cold-blooded murder trailing behind them.
It's Tuesday night at Carmen's Kitchen, a restaurant in East Boston. Inside, at a table in the back, are the men who now run the Mafia for all of New England. There's the new boss, veteran Boston gangster Peter Lamoni. To his right, Bobby DeLuca, up from Providence. He's the new underboss. And here's Anthony D'Annunzio, a Mafia captain and key member of Lamoni's inner circle. The mobsters gathered at Carmen's Kitchen after attending a wake for the mother of another Mafia captain held just around the corner. The meeting is visual evidence of the new order in the New England mob.
The Rhode Island underworld in the early 2000s was made up of a number of elderly Italian gang bosses who ran crews of dealers, enforcers, and debt collectors out on the streets. Unlike a lot of mafia organizations across the country, the bosses in Providence got their hands dirty and were actively involved in things from home invasions to murders, well into their 80s and even 90s. The New England Mafia has a history of being one of the most violent criminal organizations in the country, once led by their longtime boss, Raymond Petriarca.
When this is over with and really lay the law down, what's going on in this country? It's none but a lot of hookwick that you people have been giving me for a long time.
Petriarca was a thief and killer who rose to the role of mafia boss before he was 50. For the longest time, criminal operations in New England were all controlled by gangsters in Boston. But Petriarca moved things down to Providence, Rhode Island, where he used armed thugs to steamroll local gangsters and began murdering anyone who didn't side with him. Back in 1966, Petriarca murdered bookmaker Willie Marfeo, one of several local criminals who refused to comply with his new mafia organization, and was was shot dead in a phone booth one night. Maffeo's brother Rudy and his bodyguard Anthony Malay began the process of forming their own gang, forcing bookmakers who worked for Petriarca to pay them street tribute or risk violence. They also began planning to get revenge for Willie, and Petriarca had to put an end to it. Luigi Manocchio, then 41, planned a double homicide at a Providence supermarket Maffeo shopped at every Saturday like clockwork. Manocchio was a gunman and a Mafia soldier who was known to be a playboy and had an affair with Petriarca's personal doctor, Dr. Barbara Roberts. On the afternoon of Saturday, April 20, 1968, Manocchio's crew, led by hitman John Kelly, ambushed Maffeo and Mele at the store, shot them dead inside, and escaped quickly without police catching them. In 1969, however, Kelly and another New England hitman, Joe Barboza, both became police informants and indicted Manocchio, Petriarca, and the rest of the murder crew. Police approached Manocchio, who dressed and acted as a woman to evade them, and then went on the run. Over the next 11 years, Manocchio lived in France and in New York City undercover. In 1983, he choosibly turned himself in and got 2 life sentences, but the case was overturned when it was revealed that Kelly's testimonies were mostly lies. After getting out of prison, Manocchio started a robbery ring, stealing $10 million over the years, and in 1999 got 3 years probation when he admitted that the kitchen appliances in his mother's home were all stolen. By then, he was the boss of the Providence Mafia and ran the sprawling criminal enterprise out of a humble apartment above a laundromat. In the early 2000s, Manocchio had a crew working for him, and a lot of them were struggling to make money. Matthew Guglielmetti, born in 1948, became Manocchio's second in command, taking the place of Eddie Latto, who was growing too old for the job. Guglielmetti was a drug trafficker who got into the gang through his father, Matthew Sr. In 2002, federal agents launched a fake construction company in Johnston, Rhode Island, where Guglielmetti had influence as a member of the Laborers International Union of North America. He was approached by undercover agents acting as company representatives, bought his way into the company as a silent partner, and was observed for years using the company for money laundering. Guglielmetti was laundering cocaine money in the thousands. He and Manocchio were overheard on FBI wiretaps talking about mafia violence and gambling debts. And on January 20, 2005, agents raided Capital City Concrete in Cranston, Rhode Island, and arrested Guglielmetti for trying to move 4 kilos of cocaine from Rhode Island to Canada. He pleaded guilty and got 11 years. Meanwhile, Manocchio noticed a vulnerability in Rhode Island's strip club market, one he could easily take advantage of to extort Providence strip clubs out of millions of dollars. While he began putting together a ring to shake down local businesses, other gangsters like Vincent Tootsie Tallow and Anthony the Saint Laurent were running their own crews and kicking up hundreds of thousands of dollars to Manocchio. Anthony Saint Laurent was a career criminal who never even thought to go straight across his life. His gang was a family affair. His son Anthony Jr. and wife Dorothy both helped him run an extortion ring in Taunton, Massachusetts, where rival gangster Robert DeLuca also ran a crew. DeLuca was a killer from Providence who was made in the late 1980s after helping end a vicious mafia war between Boston and Providence. DeLuca and Saint Laurent had issues that eventually rose into DeLuca publicly calling Saint Laurent a rat in early 2006 and spreading the rumor to others in their circle.
The government says you want Bobby DeLuca dead. Do they have that right? Right. That's all.
St. Laurent's most recent prison stint was a 7-year sentence for twice attempting to hire hitmen to kill rival mobster Robert Bobby DeLuca. The two had a long simmering feud.
Saint Laurent allegedly then got permission from Manocchio to murder DeLuca. On April 12, Saint Laurent met with Taunton gangster Anthony Nardolillo over in neighboring Rhode Island. Saint Laurent drove the hitman into Providence that night to show him a restaurant DeLuca always dined at, named the Sidebar Bistro. For payment, he told the hitman that he planned to pay him using money from bookmakers who were paying DeLuca, since DeLuca would be killed and Saint Laurent would take his business. While in prison in Fort Devens, wearing an oxygen mask and confined to a wheelchair, Saint Laurent got into contact with Nardolillo and fellow gangster Ricky Silva, who began discussing killing DeLuca. But Nardolillo wasn't who he seemed.
You went to the restaurant and you put it? You put me phone, right? Yeah. You went to the restaurant? I'm gonna let go. Why? No, I just, only whiter. I think he says, no repercussion. We don't want to have a problem with that. But we don't want to have a problem with Luya. No repercussion. If you want, after it's done, I'll take it. Okay, don't lose it. What? If you want to let the Louis, if you don't want, I'm going. I'll take it right through. To make sure we don't have a repercussion. And my voice should be good enough. Oh, no, it isn't. Everything is fine. I just can't walk with it. If I could be walking, I wouldn't be talking about it.
He was wearing a federal wiretap throughout their conversations in prison and on the streets with Silva. While out on a drive, Silva told Nardolillo he didn't feel safe killing DeLuca for just $20,000, since DeLuca was a made member of the Mafia. He then told Nardolillo, ironically, that he thought Saint Laurent was a rat.
Watch out, these motherfuckers ain't trying to trap us. That's another thing. I'll tell you what, if they do, I hope they're not their mother's only children.
The plot wouldn't materialize since the government had been recording every conversation between the trio. In 2007, Saint Laurent pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and got 10 years in prison. Ironically, DeLuca would later become a federal informant.
To those court documents obtained by Target 12, DeLuca and Manacchio arranged protection payments for local strip clubs to the tune of $4,000 to $6,000 a month. DeLuca was charged with RICO conspiracy, but signed a plea agreement pledging to cooperate with federal investigators. In that plea deal, the government acknowledged the danger DeLuca faced by cooperating with federal agents, saying he had the option to enter the witness protection program.
Meanwhile, Manocchio had things going out on the street. In 2002, Manocchio, Thomas Iafrate, Alfred Scivola Jr., and Edward Latto began forcing Providence strip clubs to pay them protection money, while Latto, Scivola Jr., Frank, Bobo Marapese, and Vincent Tallo were running a 24-man crew to take illegal sports bets in Rhode Island. As like any other criminal betting ring, players put money down on the odds, and if they lost, were scared into paying off their debts. At the center of their crew was Tootsie Tallo. Tallo was a local criminal who illegally sold prescription drugs and guns from his home in Johnston, Rhode Island. Marapese was one of the state's biggest criminals. He had ties to the Petrarca family going all the way back to the 60s, and in that time had grown ties to Providence motorcycle clubs and street gangsters. Back in 1975, Marapese had taken his first life, that of Richard Dicky Calle, a friend of the Mafia who was shot dead at a social club owned by Marapese's father. Throughout the 1980s, Marapese stole in the millions, taking asphalt from the city to start a paving company and hijacking lazy boy truck shipments on their way to stores so that he could resell their couches. In May of 1982, Marapese shot down Mafia member Anthony Marabella at a restaurant on Valley Street, and in August of that year, beat a 20-year-old civilian named Ronald McElroy to death in the middle of the road after McElroy had cut Marapese off. In 1987, he was charged for the murder of Dicky Calle, but got out in April of 2008, the perfect time to get out and get involved in illegal gambling. Things were shaking up in Providence that year. Manocchio was getting payments from the Cadillac Lounge, the Foxy Lady, and the Satin Doll strip clubs. Manocchio forced the owners of the strip clubs, all three owned by the same group of businessmen, to put his own employees in charge of the bookkeeping. Thomas Iafrate, Theodore Cardillo, and Richard Bonfilia were all put in charge of various roles at these clubs, Cardillo becoming the general manager of the Cadillac Lounge. Also involved in the scheme was Anthony D'Annunzio, a senior gang leader from North End Boston, who ran the neighborhood with his brother Carmen D'Annunzio. Nearing the end of 2009, Manocchio decided to retire from his position as boss of the Petrarca family. Although he continued to lead Providence, the new boss became Peter Lamona, an elderly gangster who just gotten out of a 30-year prison sentence for murder when it was exposed that he was framed for the crime by government witness Joe Barboza. In 2009, Lamona was arrested for extortion, and Anthony D'Annunzio became became the new family boss of New England. He and Cardillo began making millions from the strip club scheme, as did Minocchio, who netted some $1 million over the years.
37-year-old Napoleon Andrade was no stranger to law enforcement. Over the years, he's been arrested by police in North Providence, Pawtucket, multiple times in Providence, as well as the state police and the FBI.
Well, he's an enforcer. He's the type of person when he shows up at your door, you're going to do what you're asked to do.
Retired State Police Colonel Stephen O'Donnell, a veteran mob investigator, says Andrade was associated with former New England mob boss Luigi Baby Shax Minocchio.
Which was unusual. You know, a mob boss trusting someone outside of the mob family, but those relationships developed over years, and Louis Minocchio trusted him.
Napoleon Andrade was involved personally with Minocchio as his bodyguard. Andrade was a gangster from Central Falls, a densely populated city within Pawtucket, Rhode Island, that holds a higher crime rate than the rest of the state. In the 2000s, Central Falls was a dense, corrupt prison city, home to numerous gangs and street toughs like Andrade. Andrade worked as a bouncer at the clubs Minocchio shook down, and the two likely came into contact around 2007 or 2006. They worked together for years until Minocchio trusted Andrade enough to make him his driver and bodyguard. In 2008, police began monitoring Andrade as he attempted to steal and sell drugs across Pawtucket. In December of 2009, ATF agents posed as buyers who purchased $1,000 worth of marijuana from Andrade inside of his Central Falls apartment and observed another 15 bags of marijuana inside. In December of 2009, Andrade was lured to a storage unit in northern Providence that agents had rented out and filled with illegal cigarettes. Andrade had purchased a set of bolt cutters and planned the robbery. Him and the agent then busted into the small garage and got $30,000 worth of cigarettes from it. In January of the following year, Andrade told an undercover agent that he'd hidden a kilo of cocaine under a treadmill at his apartment building gym, which the agents then recovered and confirmed the presence of. In April, Andrade planned a robbery at a Connecticut home of someone that he knew had a kilogram of cocaine. He approached an informant with the ATF and provided him with a .357 caliber to break in and steal the drugs from the home, but the robbery never happened. In March of 2010, ATF agents planted a vehicle in Central Falls with 100 grams of crack cocaine, stolen jewelry, and $500 in cash, and an undercover agent lured him to the car and got him to break in. Minocchio put Andrade to work as well, getting him to collect extortion payments from the clubs he bounced at. An issue formed around that same time with other gangsters near Providence, Nicola Melia and Gennaro Miele. Melia was a Connecticut-based member of the 'Ndrangheta, a widespread Calabrian criminal organization with ties all over the world. Melia, then 78, was the brother of Vincenzo Melia, another Connecticut Calabrian who tried to murder his girlfriend back in the 80s, returned to Italy, and formed the Sacra Corona criminal network. In 2012, Vincenzo Melia was overheard by police declaring himself more powerful than God, arrested soon after for drug trafficking, and died in police custody. Miele and Melia had problems over a $300,000 loan sharking debt owed by Melia. On the morning of March 8, 2010, Miele drove Andrade and Mafia member Stephen Conti to Melia's North Stamford home. Andrade posed as a delivery man as Melia opened the door, and he then tackled the 78-year-old gangster to the floor, tied him, and blindfolded him as the trio raided the home and stole $216,000 worth of cash and jewels, and a shotgun. Before they left, Melia asked them to leave a couple bucks so he could get Starbucks later. Another plot formed in 2010 with a marijuana dealer named Raymond Jenkins, a member of the Mafia, who was involved in extorting a car salesman. The salesman owed a debt to another gangster, which he'd borrowed after defrauding his employer and needed Jenkins' help. Jenkins agreed to organize a payment system, but the salesman couldn't come up with the money. Albino Folgarelli, another old gangster, then went to the business, but the salesman wasn't there, and when his co-workers called him to tell him to stay away from the dealership, he panicked and paid $25,000 from his wife's retirement savings.
The plea deal may have spared Folgarelli a life sentence. Target 12 has learned the longtime criminal may have been a candidate for a federal career offender law, a law designed to keep bad guys off the streets forever. Albino Focarelli is no stranger to law enforcement. Records show the 54-year-old has been convicted at least 6 times for serious crimes, ranging from assault with a dangerous weapon to drug dealing. We've uncovered he's been in and out of prison for the last 30 years. This is an ACI mugshot from several years ago. Here's a Johnston police booking photo for a domestic violence charge, which was eventually dismissed. Prosecutors say he has been a longtime associate of the New England mob, and it was his life of crime that may have played a major role in signing off on a plea deal. On Tuesday, Focarelli pledged to plead guilty to extortion conspiracy. The plea deal obtained by Target 12 means that Focarelli could see about 10 years in prison, but that's a whole lot less than a potential life sentence he could receive under a habitual offender law. The law requires 2 other violent crimes or drug offenses before the harsh sentence is imposed. Investigators say Focarelli and 2 other defendants, Capo Regime Edward Eddie Lato and mob associate Raymond Scarface Jenkins, extorted $25,000 from a Johnston used car salesman.
In a simpler time, men with Sicilian surnames and sharkskin suits were the very embodiment of domestic terror in blue-collar neighborhoods, even the corridors of power. But today brought proof that La Cosa Nostra is not quite ready for museum mothballs. It was a roundup of so many alleged Goodfellas, the feds used an army base to hold them all. So what is the state of the modern mafia, and is it anything close to the brand made famous by Brando?
Police eventually put together a case against Minocchio, the 2 crews he oversaw in Providence, and some 120 gangsters in a huge East Coast mafia bust that stretched from Florida to New Hampshire. The raids took place in January of 2011, Minocchio being caught in Fort Lauderdale and extradited north. The charges in New York City included 2 gangland murders, one during a robbery gone wrong, and the other in a bar after one gangster spilled another one's drink. Also arrested was Andrade, charged with drug trafficking. In 2012, Minocchio pleaded guilty to extortion and got 5.5 years behind bars. He told the court, quote, "By virtue of my position, I inherited the deeds of my associates. I simply do not want my family or friends to believe I personally threatened anybody." During the case, numerous friends of Minocchio came to the court for his support, with only good things to say about him. They portrayed him as a fit, healthy old man who kept local kids away from crime and donated to the needy, while the prosecution portrayed him as a killer with a life of crime under his belt, stealing from strip clubs to pocket small sums of cash in a dying criminal market. Scivola, Iafrate, Lato, and Tallo were all named in the indictment as well. In all, pleaded guilty to minor sentences, each getting a few years behind bars. Andrade, meanwhile, pleaded guilty to drug trafficking and got a decade in prison. Melia got 5 years for extortion. Frank Bobo Marapese got 9 years for extortion and blackmail and passed away at the adult correctional institution in 2017. Meanwhile, the case against the home invasion plot began to materialize in 2014 when Stephen Conti began wearing a wire against Gennaro Miele. Miele told Conti on wiretap that he better not rat against him and tried intimidating him into not cooperating with law enforcement. On September 1st, 2014, Miele pleaded guilty to home invasion and got 41 months in jail, while Andrade got 63. On November 4, 2015, Minocchio was released from the halfway house he was staying in, and just a few years later, Andrade was released into a halfway home in Pawtucket. That brings us back to the beginning of this video, March 10, 2019. On that day, Andrade exited the front entrance of his halfway home like any other day, only this time, the security cameras were switched off. As he walked outside, a stolen Honda Accord drove up in the snow, and shooters in the car shot Andrade dead outside the home before speeding off. Andrade was shot dead at 9:30 a.m. and stayed lying in the snow for 4 hours before cops pulled up on the scene.
They say he was an inmate at the home serving out the final months of his federal prison sentence. He was serving time in connection to a home invasion from 2010. The house he broke into at the time belonged to an associate of the Gambino crime family in New York. Pawtucket police believe yesterday's shooting was not random.
To this day, it's unknown who shot him, who ordered it, and what the motive was, but the most accepted theory was that it was a violent gangland retribution for the home invasion on Melia's property 9 years prior, and that, to some capacity, corrupt local police officers were involved. On December 8, 2024, Manocchio passed away from natural causes at the age of 97, an entire century spent within the gritty and bloody world of organized crime in Rhode Island. As a side note, Frank Matapese's son, Frank Matapese Jr., pleaded guilty this year to the 2019 torture and murder of his ex-girlfriend, Lauren Issei, at her Cranston, Rhode Island apartment. Matapese Jr. will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole.